All right, we are live. Everyone, thank you so much for joining the Advanced Persistent Threat and Cybersecurity Group. Today, we have the honor of meeting Tammy Klotz, the CISO at Trinseo. We have Jason Haward-Grau. He is a partner at KPMG. Just want to give you a heads up, everyone. These are two of my close friends, and I want to thank them so much for joining us today. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. Tammy, Jason, thank you so much.
Very
Thank you,
well.
Aaron. Thanks for the opportunity.
Good to spend some time with my friends. This isn't going to be a podcast. This is going to be a fun conversation, I suspect. Knowing the way we go, just saying. You're warned.
So everyone who knows who joins us, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the LinkedIn page for questions. So please submit questions, and what I'll do is I'll bring them up as we go along. But we're going to be covering a whole bunch of topics. Tammy has recently written a book called Leading with Empathy and Grace, which we're going to be talking about, and it's a fantastic book that everyone should be able to read that you can get on Amazon right now. And Jason, again, what is the topic we're going to be talking about? I totally forgot the name of it.
Do you know what? I don't know. We'll probably talk a little bit about resilience and the challenges that we're seeing in organizations, because now the world is actually tipped a little bit on its axis, and we're thinking slightly differently about how to ensure resilience, not just cyber, but generally. So yeah, we'll have a chat about that too, probably.
Awesome. So yeah, we're going to kick a talk about cyber resilience. We're going to have a good time today. And again, you have any questions, please ask them, and we'll go through them. So, Tammy, I'd love to start off when we start talking about your book. When we say on your book, what are the kind of dynamics involved with building as you talk about a high performance team?
Sure, Aaron. Thank you. So the book itself, as Aaron said, is entitled "Leading with Empathy and Grace," which are two words that you don't necessarily hear in the corporate world very often. So it takes a very different focus and approach of essentially focusing on the human elements of leading a high performing team, and how you develop the necessary relationships, foundational trust that are required to bring a team together as a cohesive unit in such a way that everybody is working towards a set of common goals. They know what their vision is. They know that they can depend on one another. And that, as a team, we are either succeeding or failing together. Obviously, we prefer the succeeding route. So what you'll find in the book is another very conversational tone. It's not academic. It is not checklist. It's filled with stories with regards to things that have worked well for me in my 30 plus years of leadership in a variety of different companies. But there's definitely some anecdotes and some tips and tricks that I've used to really bring teams together. So just to highlight a few of those, one of the things that I do when I onboard with a new team is to, kind of put myself out there, so everybody gets to see the human side of Tammy, not the CISO side of Tammy, right? So, sharing things that I'm comfortable with from a personal perspective, and then, in reciprocation of that, of having each of them do the similar, right? So you get to establish some bonds and some common ground that you may not find out about that you have in common with somebody until days, months, weeks later. But by having the intentional exchange and interface with your team members to really get to know them on that human level, I think is kind of that first step in establishing a solid team going forward. One of the other things that I do and talk about in the book is, there's a whole section on, it's actually towards the end of the book, but it's one of my favorite topics, is all around self-care and making sure that you as a leader is taking care of yourself, but then also that you're encouraging each of your team members to do that as well. So one of the things, again, from an intentionality perspective that I do with my teams is we find time to decompress as a unit. And in some cases, it's extremely challenging to do that, especially when you have remote teams. Not everybody's in the same location, but how do you find the opportunity or make the opportunity to bring the team together? So in my current organization, what we do right now is we have a Friday fun half hour, right? The only rule is no shop talk, no work talk. It's more about, what's going on this weekend? What are the kids up to? Are you traveling? And it really, breaks down some of the barriers and helps build friendships amongst the people who have to work together. And I find what makes that so successful is really our ability to bring people together, which I will say is one of my superpowers. So, because you bringing folks together formulates those bonds to want to do well together and to succeed together. So those are just some. I mean, I could probably take the whole hour, and then Jason would be like, "What the heck, Tammy?"
I know, nothing new. I know my place.
But so
I seem to recall you talking about axe throwing a lot as part of your get together, which for me, as a Dour Scotsman, it's obviously an important social skill to be able to lob weapons around.
But,
you build trust that way, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was at my last organization where everybody was in the same office. So we made time and carved time out to do some extracurricular activities, right? And whether that was a Friday morning breakfast or whether it was a Tuesday night axe throwing, again, it takes you out of the normal context.
That explains why Aaron does breakfast. Sorry to cut across you.
Well, yeah. So we have a distillery around my area that does axe throwing, and there's nothing like drinking a big glass of vodka and then throwing an axe. And I always thought that was a great mix to have.
Just thinking health and safety.
Fantastic health and safety.
One thing you said, Tammy, which I think is really important, and you kind of touch upon it, when you build the social relationships and the fabric in an organization, normally I get pulled in my current job. My last role as a CISO, like you, was kind of the master of all things. Oh, we lost her.
Oh, so yeah,
hopefully she'll come back. And whilst we're waiting, one of the things that kind of ties in is really interesting is that she touches on the need for social fabric. My job a lot of the time is response and recovery. So I get pulled in when the bad stuff's happened and you hit the fence or the wall and bad actors are doing bad things. And you normally see the worst of behaviors.
Yes.
But equally at the same time, and this is something that I'm sure when Tammy reconnects a laptop, gets in there, she'll say the same thing.
There you go. I happened to make sure. I'm sorry.
There is a lot of kind of allegory between ensuring that you have the right people and in the environment doing the right things at the right time. And growing those relationships and being in a position where you can do that comes from trust. And something you touched on, Tammy, which I think was really important. I do it with my team. Often we'll land in an environment where it's extremely hostile. You have all of the most toxic behaviors because people are under pressure. Pressure brings out the worst in people, but also brings out the best in people. And if you built a robust team who respect you, and I use the word grace, which I think you use deliberately, and it's a really important word. It isn't about you. It's about how you bring everybody else together. It isn't about how you deal with the problem, but how we approach and fix challenges. And I love the fact that, and I haven't read the book fully, and hands up, it is. I know, but I'm waiting for it to be signed.
Tammy's face, I saw that.
I know, right? I got grief. I've got it. She just hasn't signed it yet. So I didn't, anyway, I'm messing with you just a little. But there is a really important point to it, which is if you build a resilience in your relationships and you apply grace. And grace is just something I'm going to ask you to define because I've got a very ethereal view of it. I think you do a much better job than I can. Grace is an important facet to being able to lead. Leadership isn't about pointing people in direction, abrogating accountability, and just saying you've got to go fix this. It's actually about, especially under pressure, being able to lead together. So how do you define grace, if I can steal the question from Aaron for 2 seconds?
Oh, please, go ahead.
Yeah, so in the simplest form, I would say kindness. However, my more favorite way to describe grace is radical acceptance of one's humanity. which if you kind of break that down, it's really, accepting people for who they are and what they bring to the table and affording them the grace, the leeway to take risks, to make mistakes, um, allowing them to make a mistake once, but not twice, and having a very honest, open and honest conversation with them about, what they're doing to bring value to the organization, empowering them. But it's that radical acceptance. I love those two words together of accepting one's humanity and what they can bring to the table as the people that they are.
I love it. I love it. I think I'm going to add a little bit more to it just for contextually. One of the things that we built as a value in pretty much every leadership team I've worked in the last 15 or so years, it's all around recognition that you have freedom to fail. There's a distinction around failure, which is important because human beings ironically learn more from failure than we do from success often, because success reinforces specific sets of behaviors in specific ways. Whereas often when you fail at something, you are much more introspective and you want to learn why, especially if you've got the right mindset. And it's a safe environment to do it, which is why I like you use the word grace. And I think it's so important to allow that flexibility. We had a kind of the conversation around it was very much around, if you think you can and you should, do it. Recognize that failure is part of the mechanics of how we grow. And one of my favorite bosses from years and years and years ago said, do you realize the number of times a human being will fall down when they're learning to walk? And as human beings, we don't think about it in those terms anymore. We think about it, well, I can walk, I do what I need to do. But actually, the average child will fall somewhere between 750 to 1,000 times before they are actually confident on their feet. Same principle applies everywhere else. Most organizations view failure as the enemy. What I love about the way you describe it is you recognize that there is actually room for failure. There's room for experimentation. There's room for opportunity to grow differently. And I think that's brilliant.
And it's not so much, the allowance for failure, but endorsing people or empowering people to take the risk on an idea that they believe in, that they would like to attempt or try, and giving them that grace that says, okay, it didn't really turn out the exactly way we had expected it, but what would you do different? How would you do it differently? And how would you change the outcome? And I saw that there's a comment in the LinkedIn Live with regards to, grace and humility can be perceived by some as a weakness. And, one of the things that I talk about in the book and in a variety of conversations that I've had is that a lot of times people will think of those two things along with some of the other qualities that I highlight in the book with regards to those are the soft skills. And I hate that word because if anything, they are critical, they are crucial skills that are required to effectively lead a team, right? It doesn't mean that, I don't hold folks accountable or they don't need to deliver on what their goals and objectives are, but it's about how you deliver the messages to them so that they can be successful. So I just challenge you back, Rupa, with regards to, it's not a female thing, right? It is a leadership thing, and how you deal with people is fundamentally what's at the heart of that. So I think it is a challenge. I do believe that in some cases it is, soft skills are, more adept or more likely to be demonstrated by females, but there's something to be said for a leader who can definitely lead with empathy, lead with grace to bring people to success.
It's interesting. We have a concept in KPMG called servant leadership. Something that it should be blind to all characteristics. It doesn't matter the person that you are, to your point. I think males have a tendency to be more, I'm going to show you how to lead because that's the way I've been brought up in some respects. And coming from a UK kind of background, that's certainly where we started from. But here's the funny thing. A servant leader doesn't take the responsibility lightly, but recognizes that they are there to improve others. And it's a really fascinating dynamic because you've got two very traditional words, to your point, soft skills. I call them interpersonal or emotional skills, emotional awareness, whatever you want to call it, situational awareness. Those things may be slightly differently perceived than soft skills. But I'm amazed at the number of people, especially in high pressure situations, the first thing that goes out the window is those very important skills. Asking the right questions, asking them in the right way, doing it in a way that's blame free. You do it brilliantly. You and I have known each other for years now, and one of the nice things about it, and we all have, to be fair, when we talk about what's important, it isn't from a perspective of anything to do with gender. It isn't anything to do with the designs of who you are, but it's more about actually having an active listening and that's curious. Why did you say that? What's interesting about that is, and it doesn't have the loading. And that's why I think grace is so very important in what you do. And it's a really tough job. This job you have is probably one of the hardest jobs today, in part because of where it came from. It's funny, I was talking to another CISO about it recently, and his comment was, it's kind of, we got at that stage now where we're the angry teenagers stomping around. So we're not mature adult yet. CISOs aren't necessarily seen as fully independent from IT, so they're kind of still seen under the parent-child relationship to a degree. And you've got a range of different types and styles of CISO. But what I think, and Aaron, it's funny, we were talking about this, Tammy, just before you joined, one of the things that I'm seeing time and time again is good CISOs are phenomenal communicators at all levels. And it just so happens that the word grace and empathy, you need to be able to demonstrate empathy to be able to actually operate effectively. Those that can't, I think, struggle to be good CISOs or struggle to be good leaders in general. And I think you're absolutely right, because our job is ours, because I'm in the field, is the toughest thing. Having to have a hard conversation, having to be fair about the way you're balancing, not letting your own prejudices and perceptions color your judgment, also requires empathy. It requires grace. It requires consideration. So I love the way that you position it. Sorry, Aaron, I got off on a bit of
No, and I was saying, Tammy,
She's right.
In the book you talk about listening and how critical it is, as a CISO. If you could kind of talk about that a little bit, because, with any management I had, at management I've worked under, being able to listen and understand, the people that you're working with is critical. Can you kind of talk about that a little from your book?
Yeah, I think Jason touched on it, right? Active listening is key, right? And being 100% present when you're in a dialogue where, you're expected to be able to respond to the conversation that is going on. So, one of the things that when I coach and I mentor people, especially when they're just getting into leadership, and in today's world where we're all working a lot more remotely than we ever did. And right now I have a global team. So, I can't have, somebody in my office face to face with me all the time. But when I'm with those individuals one-on-one, my job and my duty to those individuals who work for me is that I am 100% present for them. So no multitasking, no replying to, other IMs that are coming in, not reading email, because they deserve that time, right? And they need to know that they're important enough that I'm going to give them that time during those sessions, right? And, that again will build the level of respect within the organization. And I think that one of the, outcomes of conducting yourself in that fashion, and this talks about the listening part of it. It talks about what we talked about earlier about building the trust within the organization. When you are transparent in your communications, your style, your team builds a level of respect for you. And what ends up happening in those situations is, in the event that there is not great news that has to be delivered, whether it's because of business restructuring or something that's going on in the organization that is not pleasant, when you have to deliver, you are much more well received by your team because they know who you are, they trust you, and it's not going to be as difficult of a conversation to have because of that mutual respect that actually exists. I think the other thing from a listening perspective is if you think about it, and I think it's a Stephen Covey quote with regards to, the problem with some individuals is that they listen to respond as opposed to listening to understand. So, and we're all guilty of it depending upon the situation, right? If somebody is, pontificating with you about some, thing that they want to try, or they're complaining about something that happened, you're immediately into that mode of, okay, what am I going to say back? What am I going to say back? And I just would urge all of you to pause and be present, which is another principle in the book that I actually talk about as well, is being present and giving the people the time, so that you can actually hear what they're saying and then use your reflective listening skills. So, echoing back to them, I think this is what I heard you say. Do I understand correctly? And now let's talk about how we can, address the particular situation that has been being discussed, as opposed to firing back immediately. Well, I think we should do this, this, and this, and then it won't be a problem anymore, right? So it's that active level of engagement from a listening perspective to give the people the time that they actually deserve.
And I think people know right away if you're not providing that active listening. They could see it in how you're communicating.
Mm-hmm.
You notice too and I'll meet with people, and you notice if they're looking at their phone, if they're doing different stuff, if they're not paying attention, and they're having a conversation with you, it comes across as I'm not listening to you. I obviously I don't think I care about you, your problems that you're trying to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
and
also
go ahead, Jason.
No, you're good. You're tying into the respect that you're giving to others. I mean, I see it time and time again, and we're all guilty of it. We're guilty of it, and you're right. When you're in a virtual environment, if you're not actively listening and focusing on the conversation at hand, because we're through a screen, it's so much more difficult to assess body language.
Yes.
Because a communication plus is nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
You may give me an update on something, but if I'm busy, I've got a screen over there, and yeah, I'm listening, Tammy. It's all good. Yeah, I'm going to focus on that. I'm tapping away at my keyboard. I'm not giving you the time and effort that you're entitled to, so the focus that you should have, and two, I might miss something important. And I've seen this, especially in the world in which I operate in, which is obviously heavily project and program based, where we're responding to clients who may not want to tell us they've got a problem. They may not want to honestly say, guys, that this identity program that we've got right now is X, and we really need it to be Y. Or, hey, listen, we've got some really strong people in this space, but we're struggling here. You have to look for it, and it's actually a really important skill that seems to be going out the window to a degree, because people don't get taught in the same way that we did to pay attention. In the world in which we're operating now, we're all used to immediate responses to everything. And Tammy, it's so funny that we focus on outcome resolution. Well, okay, I know what you're saying, and it's this, rather than asking those really important clarifying questions. One is to check understanding, to your point, but two, to also let's frame what you're talking about. Let's understand it. And it's something that it's such an important skill. So what I think I heard you say is, and what I understand, and help me understand the problem, and then not being the thing that I find amazing from a leadership standpoint. I've had take the hill leaders in my life who are literally, oh, we're going there. That's the way. That way. And you say, well, do you know what? Thought about this a little bit. Maybe there's a different way that might be a little bit easier. And they've got the blinkers on, and all they care about is that's the direction. My bonus depends on delivering this, therefore we're going to deliver to that. Maybe that's the world that we lived in. But in the environment that we're now in, and to your point, Tammy, you run a global team. So you can only see through a screen for what, 70, 80% of those people? So giving the courtesy of spending a little bit of time just focusing on them, it gets repaid in spades.
Actually, I was going to ask, because both of you guys, manage teams. So when you have disparate teams like that all over the world, is it required that you want to get FaceTime with them sooner or later? Or do you have a set time? You're like, okay, I know I have to meet with this person once a year to help build that relationship up kind of face to face. Is that true?
In ideal circumstances, yes, but there are some times where financial conditions actually prevent that from happening. So I can tell you, actually today is my 1 year with Trinseo anniversary. So I made it, but there are members on my team that I have not met in person yet, right?
Yeah.
However, what I am super happy to say is that we've been able to forge the relationships necessary to be successful by communicating like this, and not being afraid to tap on Teams and say, hey, do you have a minute for me, right? And making yourself available is key, right, in those situations. I think Friday Fun has helped tremendously with that as well. But ideally, yes, I'm the first person who will say, the team will gel way quicker if you're all together in person. Just sometimes it's not feasible for whatever reason, but what then needs to happen is it intentionally.
Did she just lock up on us?
She did. That was a great pose.
Yeah. I was about to say that what she was talking about, on the sales side, we have SKOs, the sales kickoffs. And it's a yearly process where they get everyone together, right? And the importance of that is absolutely huge, right? And the reason for that is allows everything from the team members to the management to everyone build that relationship up. And especially when we go out for dinner together, it allows us to step outside of our work uniform and start learning and building relationships on a personal level with people, which changes everything. Even with me and you, when we work together, when we went out to talk about our family, to talk about our kids, to talk about, what we really care about. She's about to jump in right now. To talk about what we really care about is critical. And honestly, those are the things to me are the most important, right? I love to hear, about personally what you guys are doing in your life, what's important to you. For me, that's what excites me, and that's what I love about the relationship. I mean, the work stuff is great, but it's about the personal stuff. And if you're happy with your life, that really makes me happy.
Personal ties it together. I think to Tammy's point, we've changed the way we work. COVID came along and really changed. I mean, you've changed your life massively, but it changed our working operations significantly. I'm still meeting. I've been back at KPMG 3 or so years now. I'm still meeting people that I've seen in a small box on a screen in person for the first time 3 years later. Hey, I happen to be on XYZ client doing a recovery, and I finally, good Lord, you're taller than I thought you were, or good Lord, you're more vivacious than I thought you were. Wow, the dimensions that you get, and I agree with that. The thorny question I get asked a lot is, should we all be back in the office? Should we be back in this environment? We get those conversations a lot, and I think I'm curious, Tammy, where you sit on that, just by virtue of that. I know where I sit, and I think it's a good thing. But mandating change is hard now that we've all got used to this. We can get by working remotely. We can get by being in our home office. But actually, from a health perspective, what I did discover, and this is my own personal journey, I have a bad habit of getting into my office at home at 7 a.m, and I'll be here till 7, 8, 9 at night sometimes because I forget to get up and walk around. And my brilliant wife will remind me to move and go and eat and spend time, because we let the working day elongate naturally because it's an easy thing to do. But it also means that, to your point, you're not giving yourself any self-care. You're not taking the time to say, do you know what? I can take this client call walking around the block, which I now do a fair bit. Or I can walk on the treadmill quietly and no one can hear me whilst I'm listening to this overview of X, Y, or Z. I don't know, just curious as to where you land on that, because I agree with you. Personal interactions are important, but is it?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, right? Because at Trinseo, the deal is we're supposed to be in the office on Wednesdays, right? So I'm in the office today, and obviously I'm having connection problems, which I don't have when I'm at home, but that's another That's another podcast.
We are so going to be taking
So
Mickey out of you, Chris. You know that, right?
I do apologize.
This is going to be an ongoing thing. And Tammy
Yeah.
loves us so much. She engineered IT issues. Just
It's absolutely brilliant. It's brilliant.
I'm actually trying to get my other PC connected to see if I have the same issues. So I apologize because I'm multitasking instead of being 100%
Oh no, you're fine.
present for you guys.
We've taken note. We've taken note. Say what you do and you do what right.
Say what
you do what you say. I don't know.
No, so the whole challenge of in the office or not, right? So I think I personally struggle with that because I am such a people person, and the energy that you get and that you can take away from sitting in the same room with people trying to solve a problem is, it is powerful, right? But for 2 years during COVID, we were successful in a different fashion, right? And there are people who have gotten used to working that way. There are people who have gotten, flexibility that they never had before. So my perspective on that is if you're getting your job done, I don't care where you are. Right. If I tell you I need you in the office for a certain meeting or in a certain event, then yeah, I'm going to expect you to be there. Right. But we've had this debate, my CIO and I'm like, look, I'm an hour away from my offices now. And I'm here today and there might be 20 people in the office with me. So why? Right. I can be, as productive at home. I don't have to spend 2 hours in the car and I can still get my job done. Right. And to your point, Jason, yesterday I started at 7:30 and I didn't get off the phone until 8:30. Right. But there was definitely different things that I was doing and, sprinkled in throughout the day because I was able to, because I was home. So I could throw a load of laundry in or, whatever I need to do in those circumstances. And personally, I don't feel guilty if it's the middle of the day and I have to run to get something from the grocery store that I don't have from dinner because I'm getting my job done, right? Yeah. So from that perspective, it's an element of grace. If you can give your employees that type of grace and hold them accountable for what they're supposed to be doing, I don't care where you work, right? It's humorous to me sometimes. I have a gentleman who works for me now in Louisiana, and I have another gentleman who works in the Netherlands for me. And I think yesterday, maybe not both yesterday, but one of them IM'd me and said, "Hey, I'm going to be away for about an hour," and I'm like, "Okay." I wouldn't have known. I'm not sitting here watching you, oh, I got to go pick my son up from school. Okay. Again, but they're two of the most hardworking, passionate people about what they do. I would never think about telling them that they couldn't do that. Right. So I can go either way on in the office thing because I do think it's important. But I think what I mentioned earlier is if you're not in the office, you have to be intentional. Intentionality, I don't even know if that's a word, but it works because without that, if you don't try to make something happen, it's not going to happen. So if you put, your spirit and your passion behind that to make things work, it can work and you can be successful as an organization.
I think to your point, virtual teams is now a thing. Virtual teams is part of the way that we operate, and it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. I think the idea of going back to a traditional bricks and mortar environment on a 24/7 basis or even a 5x8 basis really doesn't stand in the same way. I mean, I'm in the office probably a couple of days a week. I'm on client sites a couple of days a week. And that's important because I build those rapport and those relationships. I get things done. To your point, there is an insidiousness to working from home that is dangerous if you don't plan for it. But there's also an accountability element of recognizing that, and Aaron and I will reflect on this a little bit, I'm sure, from our past lives, where you want to be productive. But productivity is not always measured in the number of hours you spend in front of your PC or the number of hours you spend writing email. And I had a client recently who had an issue because the software that they were running to measure productivity was a problem. It was actually presented issues with the way that, and with picking on Europe as a good example, right? There are certain laws coming into place in the European Union and beyond where you can't just spy on your employees in the same way perhaps as you would have done 5-10 years ago. And what it needs to be is around how do you build trust and ensure delivery of what needs to be done. And to your point, making sure people do their job is part of a leader's remit. How they do it, it's a different conversation. I think we are changing the way we operate, and it goes back to what I probably want to talk about in a minute. From a cyber standpoint, the way that we worried about the attack surface 3-4 years ago, where we had physical locations, we've now got a multiplicity of locations. You're in the office today, Aaron, you're at home. I'm about to hop on a plane to New York, so I'm at home right now. But that doesn't mean that our attack surface hasn't changed. The way that we operate, the way we secure connections for our employees, or in your case, Tammy, the way your IT let you down today, I can't help it, it makes you smile, is true, right? The way that we operate is now becoming different. So the way that cyber needs to operate to be able to proactively enable. And it's funny, I had a conversation with a VP maybe 10 days ago. His comment to me, post some of the issues that we've been seeing across IT in the last couple of months, is, cyber disables me. Cyber is what you can't do. And I said, that's odd, because cyber should all be about enabling you to do what you need to do and making sure that you understand the risk that you're taking when you do it. Because at the end of the day, we debate this a lot. Cybersecurity is an accountability to deliver a quantification of the risk of doing business. And if we do it right, we enable you to do it. So it's just an observation.
Yeah. I think Rupa just added another comment too, and it's so true, right? So why should I drive into the office for an hour and I sit on a Teams meeting all day anyway, right? My team is remote. That's how we interact. So, yes, if there's more people here that I can interact with on a regular basis, great. But if I'm in back-to-back meetings, I drove an hour to sit in my office with the door closed and to not interact with anybody anyway. So yeah, it is a double-edged sword from that perspective. And Jason, the points that you were bringing up with regards to cyber events and talking about resiliency, I mean, there's definitely two idioms that I refer to often, right? Because we often will talk about, it's not a matter of, if, but when now. And that boils down to, it's not so much about what happened, but it's about how you handle the situation and how you respond to the situation. And that is no different than when you experience a life event or a life trauma that turns your world upside down and you weren't expecting it, but you've got to come out on the other side. And you can do that with your head in the sand, or you can poke your head out and say, I'm going to get through this. And we all, the three of us, have been through life situations like that, and we've prevailed. Right here we are. And, we could, talk about that on a whole nother, hours dialogue. But that resiliency is so important. And Jason, I think the other thing you taught me years and years ago was really around, you don't put brakes on a car to go faster. You put brakes on a car so that you can slow down when you need to, and course correct as appropriate. So that has definitely stuck with me as well. And, that is the nature of what we do on a daily basis. And, for me, it's been kind of crazy to me over the past year, probably, thinking about, people will say, well, how did you ever get into cyber? Why are you doing this? And it wasn't until recently that I really reflected on that. And I said, well, cyber's all about resiliency. My life has been all about resiliency. So being able to bring those personal characteristics and capabilities into my professional life, I think has been part of the reason why I've been successful in this role. I mean, we all know, and I know some of my team happen to be listening because they're IMing me on the side when I'm supposed to be focused. But if I think about it, when we go back to what happened on July 19th was when the CrowdStrike event actually happened. That morning was crazy. I woke up, I had 65 notifications on my phone. I knew something was wrong. And one of my technical leads who's listening, he said, I need your help. He never asks for help, right? So I knew there was something majorly wrong, right? So, and, it was a matter of getting on the call, getting everybody to understand what was going on, focusing on facts and only on facts, and putting a plan in place that said, this is how we're going to go after this. And you're going to come back in an hour and tell me what you've done or what hasn't been done, because otherwise we're going to spin and we're not going to know what we're going to accomplish. And one of the greatest things for me living through that event here was, the recognition of the fact that, if that would have happened a year ago, the dynamics would have been so different. And the recognition of how you can bring people together, in the time of crisis to make things happen and get things done is instrumental. And without it, you just add cycles. Frustrations build. Anger prevails. And we had none of that. We had a powerful team of probably 50, 60 people that rallied to bring the organization back online. And it was commended by our CEO, our board of directors, because while it was certainly not a non-event, it was perceived as a non-event because of the response. So again, not what, but how the team reacted and responded to that situation.
So because you had a team you trusted.
Yeah. I'm gonna throw in a couple of things because I saw this a little bit more broadly because of where I sit as a partner in the firm. We were pulled into a lot of recovery response post that particular incident, and it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time. And to your point, it's not a question of if; it's a question of when. I think there were two interesting reality shifts that certainly at the board level, a number of CEOs and board members kind of took away from it after we managed to walk some of them off the ledge of, we've got to get rid of these security tools. They're destroying our ability to operate. And I can't believe we've ever, why? One of the things that I think came out was a recognition that there is now reliance on services outside of our walls, which is something that over the last 10 years, we started out, I think about maybe 15, right? We started out with, we're going to put everything in the cloud. And the cloud was really just somebody else's data center, and it was a way of driving cost out. And when we go back and look at it, and I remember the first cloud services I did in industry, the ability to scale, this fantastic, unlimited ability to put CPU and memory and storage, it was phenomenal. Whereas the constraints of traditional IT kind of got in the way. And what we're now seeing is, hang on a minute, the cyber risk didn't necessarily get understood. Even the IT risk didn't really get understood. People didn't think about how this would impact. And the fact that you're now reliant on services, and cyber is just one indicator, I guess, of that in some respects, right? We take cyber risk, we take protection services from a range of different places. We've got Microsoft, I'm not going to pick on products because that's not fair. But you think about all the security providers and where our data centers are today versus where they were 10 years ago. The landscape and the ecosystem has changed. That's one thing that a lot of CEOs finally started to understand and realize that, okay, so my data, my organization's data is no longer within my walls. It's actually in SAP's walls, Oracle's walls. It's in Salesforce's. It's in Workspace. These are no longer my systems. They're actually owned by other parties, and we just get processing. How does that work? And the other thing that I thought was absolutely fascinating was you were lucky because you built a team around you very quickly. And for you, it was a non-event, which in some senses I think served you well because it demonstrated how brilliant you are at conducting and pulling a team together, and that orchestra of flowing music comes out as a result of the Tammy Klotz experience, which is brilliant. Come on, I'm going to mess with you. Mess with me, it's only fair. But at the same time, there are other organizations where they didn't they didn't have the same benefit, and they will then expect that should something like this happen again, they're going to have the same outcome. And it may not be, because one of the things that organizations are starting to also wake up to is, I need to actually understand what my crown jewel processes are. And it used to be, when we used to do it donkeys ago, what are the assets that they run on? And what are the services that run on them? And now what we're seeing is, because of this complex ecosystem where you no longer own the platform, or you no longer own the service or the software, but you're integrally required to ensure it's in place to support what you do. Holy cow, I need to think differently about how my crown jewel processes work. And there are a lot of organizations that, when the blue screen of death landed, and it landed pretty unpleasantly, to be fair, in a lot of cases, they were not as well positioned as you to be able to deal with it. And what we're now seeing is more and more organizations saying, okay, this needs to be thought about differently. We need to think about resilience as a competence now at the end of the NIST. It's one of the reasons why I think NIST was revamped over the course of the last year or so. If you look at the way that organizations are playing now, it's like, okay, if I can only secure what I can see, but what I can see is not what I actually have to worry about, I've got to think about doing this differently. So it's really brought that whole perspective back on, what are my crown jewel things? And do I actually understand how to identify, map, and detect and protect those things? And we equally, go back to it, right? From Log4j a year or so ago, maybe 2 years now, right? And we had SolarWinds, and we've had WannaCry, and we've had, these are not going away, which was the other big realization. What it means is, good organizations are now starting to think, how do I become more resilient? I did a quick look up just for fun. The average cost of a cybercrime so far this year is just under 3 million. Up from about 1 million or so a year ago. So cybercrime, I know I'm pivoting a wee bit, cybercrime is driving a lot of this kind of activity. If you don't have line of sight, and if you're not resilient, and resilience, to your point, covers everything from, what's my way of dealing with an incident when it happens? Who do I get in the room? How do I ensure I have good command and control processes? Do I have muscle memory, mental muscle memory, to be able to say, okay, this is an incident. You do it instinctively because you've been doing it for years. What if you're not in the room? What if you're stuck on a plane flying back from Bora Bora because you decided to take a long holiday? It's that, how do we have that repeatable approach, which I think is coming back to haunt us? It's something that we thought about 10 years ago, and we all went, we got a process. We can tick a box. We're compliant. And compliance, as we all know, is a really important facet of what we do. But compliance doesn't mean you're secure or robust. Just my 10 pence.
No.
Again. All right. I get off my soapbox.
No, that's good, because I know we were already geared towards cyber resilience anyway. So, everyone asks the question every time we do one of these, the role of AI, right? Because every time, and how is it changing with cyber resilience? All right. How is it changing? Where do you see this role within cyber resilience? How is it changing? Is it, and the big question is, I guess with most organizations, Jason, you probably know this, are most boardroom are they actually understanding that it's not a matter of is it going to happen, or when is a cyber attack going to happen, right? And how the process of protection, and when we're going to do that. So let's go back to AI then, and cyber resilience, and kind of get your thoughts on that.
Tammy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start, right? And, the way that I think about AI, and the way I talk about AI within my organization and within my peer group, is really around the fact that AI is a new technology, and it's, as impactful as when the internet was born, right? It is a new way for us to work at this point in time. We need to figure out how it's going to change our world, right? And like any good thing that happens, there's always a bad side that comes with it, right? So, for as much as AI is going to be able to assist with things like automation of remedial tasks and, helping you construct a PowerPoint presentation much more quickly than if you were starting from scratch, there are going to be the abuse and misuse of the same technology that is going to make our lives from a cyber perspective much more challenging. So when we talk about things like deep fakes and, even all of the phishing emails, right? Well, the telltale sign a few years ago of a phishing email was it was grammatically incorrect. There were spelling mistakes. There was improper capitalization. That all goes away now because, you type it into ChatGPT and it's going to be perfect or almost perfect in what it displays back to you. So we've lost one indicator, but we have a lot of other tools and techniques in there. Deep fake is another one, and there's more and more stories that are coming out with regards to how organizations were tricked with a deep fake type video or voice or whatever, right? So, I think when we think about AI and what it's going to do to the industry, it's going to shake the industry. I don't think there's anything, to doubt that, but it is about, how we're prepared for it, using it for the good that it can bring to an organization and being aware and how to protect ourselves from the bad. So yeah, it's just like the internet, right? We can do really good things with it, but people also do really bad things with it. So it's new, we're learning. And one of the biggest things for me within our organization is really thinking about it from a data protection perspective. And how are we keeping our data safe so that it does not get improperly accessed or exploited as a result of some of the AI capabilities that exist out there today. So it's really understanding what your roadmap is going to be for that, what type of governance you're going to put around that, what can and cannot be done within the organization, and how do you have visibility of it, and how do you monitor what is actually happening. I think those are all the things that we still, have ahead of us to kind of wrap our arms around all of this. So, Jason?
That's a great way. The way you said it was, it's just like when the internet came out, because, obviously it can do incredibly good things and it can do incredibly bad things too, so looking at it like that is really neat.
Yeah, there was the whole debate, are you going to block ChatGPT or are you not? And I was like, no.
Well, I think it's interesting. I'll add a couple of thoughts because I think you're right, Tammy. So the first thing is you can't put the sword back in the scabbard. I think that was a Norman Schwarzkopf quote for unleashing. Maybe not, but there's certainly a great quote. I'm going to reuse it because the truth is it's out. And to your point, Tammy, we can choose whether we use it or don't. And I would argue right now we have predominantly focused very much on ChatGPT as the most kind of obvious type of AI, right? It's the one that's it's the language model build out, it's the understanding, and a lot of those are still just in English, but there's a lot more acceleration elsewhere. So first thing, to your point, you're absolutely right. If you haven't got a policy for how you're going to approach AI, even from a simplistic sense to making affirmative decisions, you're going to struggle. And a number of organizations are still struggling with that. I think to add to your point, we're seeing a resurgence because the first early adopters of new technology, in most cases, are people who want to use them for nefarious ends. Bad actors are brilliant at taking technology and disparate groups and saying, hey, listen, how can we? So we've seen an acceleration of automation, things that would normally require a human being to run cycles on attacks. They're using AI to improve and perfect code. They're using AI to target scanning processes. So the requirements for manuals, as in people like you and I, to tap on keyboards, going out the window faster and faster, which means barrier to entry is going down even further, which is obviously going to be a challenge for us. We've seen resurgent things like vishing, to your point, right? One of the latest models requires less than 300 words to be able to approximate a person's language. to be able to recreate a facsimile of them. And there are now detective AI looking for variation. So we're going to see AI to AI in a much more significant way in the next year or two, I think. The other one I think is kind of interesting is we're seeing more and more organizations start thinking about, where are we vulnerable? How do we understand our vulnerabilities? Because if exploits happen faster, and this is where we had this debate, Tammy, a long time ago, I think, around IT versus OT and why we should worry, and whether OT from an operational technology standpoint is something that was, well, it's air-gapped, it's safe, it's secure COS, and we know that that's not the case. If you're already in a situation where you don't have a good line of sight on your assets, and you don't have robust systems behind them, and you manufacture stuff, you're already at the point where you're more vulnerable. Those vulnerabilities are going to be exploited faster. So how we address that is kind of interesting. And we're having a lot of discussions today, certainly with my clients, around how do we build resilience in a landscape that may be running systems that are 30 years old. And we go to eBay to buy spares because those processors, those 486 chips that we still use, don't exist. No one makes them anymore, and the upgrade is hard. So how do you find people who do COBOL? We're seeing more security by obscurity coming back because AI is more mainstream, and it's looking at, hey, I can exploit Java and SQL. COBOL is a bit more difficult because there aren't that many people that do direct programming in COBOL or any of the non-standard languages. So I think there's going to be more in that space for sure. AI is going to make it faster, and I think the next interesting questions, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't gaze into it, and I don't want to prognosticate. I do think, though, that to your point, the sword's out the scabbard. We're going to have to decide how we use it. Do we use it as a defensive tool, or whether we use it as an offensive tool, or whether it's used as an offensive tool? Being human beings, if they see an opportunity to drive value, we know that the total cost of cybercrime is 9-10 trillion, I think it is now, something like that this year. It's ridiculous. 9 trillion, I think. So it's not going to disappear, and this is just going to make it easier. Resilience is going to become even more important. Your ability to recover and withstand, not just your people, but the infrastructure and your operations. All those things are going to make life really interesting.
Yeah, I was smiling through Jason's comments because we just came out of a meeting where we were talking about vulnerability management, right? So I chuckled. And certainly the challenges between IT and OT prevail. I've been doing this for 10 years, and a lot of the same messages are present. And I think the other thing that I wanted to make sure I mentioned, to bring it back a little bit, the whole vulnerability or being vulnerable is so, I guess I'll use impactful again, right? Think about it in the terms of the book now, right? I put this book in print, right? And so I've told my team, and they can attest to that, right? That, okay, it's out there. If I'm saying something in my book that I'm not practicing on a daily basis, you have the authority to call me out, right? So talk about being vulnerable in those situations, right? But that's because of the respect and relationships that we've built. And if we talk about the relationships, I mean, for the three of us, for those of you who have been on the call since the beginning, Jason and Aaron and I started working together 10 years ago in a vendor-client relationship. None of us are with the same company anymore, so I feel like we can talk about it. But that was built on continuous conversations, learning, understanding, and what has come out of that is a friendship and a bond that neither of us would trade for the world at this point in time. I remember telling Aaron he was the persistent salesperson that would not go away.
You make my sales manager very happy from hearing that.
but when we finally decided to proceed, I said to Aaron, I said, I feel like we're not courting anymore. Like we're actually dating now because we're going through this process together, right? But it is our families have become friends. We know each other's, what's going on in each other's lives, and that's, I know I see other people on here that I've worked with. Tiffany and Katja are both on here, and some of those relationships are new. Some of them are, foundational back to the times when I worked with Jason and Aaron as well. So it's always a pleasure to, see people that you've worked with in the past who come back, and you can reconnect, and regardless of what you're doing and where you are.
Tammy, thank you. So that was fantastic. Thank you so much. We definitely got to do one on OT cybersecurity, because that would be. I know we could talk for an hour about that. I actually just took the class, a 300 level class. I got the certification for that, and I loved it. Man, it was a great class. So, but yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, before we end up, because I know an hour is coming up here, and I know everyone else has stuff to do. Tammy, can you quickly tell everyone how they can get your book, reach your book?
Yeah. It's simple. It's on Amazon. If you just search for Leading with Empathy and Grace, you'll see it pop up. And if you want to take the opportunity to purchase one, if I do see you, I will definitely sign it for you, Jason. If you do get the book and you read the book, I would love for you all to write a review on Amazon for me as well. So appreciate that plug, Aaron.
Awesome. And Jason, I'll let you go if you want to plug anything or talk about it.
Nothing to plug. Listen, I miss you guys. You're awesome. It's fun to hang out a little bit, even in front of a live audience. So from my perspective, it's great to chat. Yeah. And sometimes the best conversation, and I said this, I think, a few times over the years, fixing a problem together is always a much more robust way of fixing it for good. And part and parcel of the way that we connect as friends. Tammy said it. We're in that with each other's lives. We're there when you need us. That's what good friends are for. Yeah. But in all seriousness, from where I'm sitting, I love these conversations. If anything we've said today helps people, then we've done a really good job.
I agree.
I'd love to do an OT one, because that's my other big passion. So
yeah, we'll definitely do an OT cyber one. I know that would be a fantastic conversation. So. All right, I think we're near our end. I am going to end the stream. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And please tell your friends. This is going to be recorded on LinkedIn Live. So if you forward the link to anybody else, they're going to have access to it. I think it's on for about 6 months on the site. I'll also promote it on the APT and cybersecurity group. Everyone, thank you so much for joining.
Have a great day.